Welcome to my first VoD review. This will be the first time that I'm sitting down and just analyzing a game after watching it a few times. The big difference that I want to have between these videos and the Stratwatch series is that the Stratwatch series is more inorganic. I want to sit down, find a concept in a certain game, and extract that concept by watching the game many times to find the exact details that I think are prudent to be able to understand and get that concept across. But here in the VoD reviews, there will be a little bit more inorganic, and I will just be going through them. So if you guys think I missed anything, or you guys think you disagree with the analysis or something that was happened in the game, you think you saw a different way, and you think that that way is better, definitely open up the discussion in the comments. The best way for these VoD analyses is to grow, and for people to get more information out of VoDs is to discuss what happened. And so, of course, if you guys have any thoughts, suggestions, or ideas about what you see during this, feel free to leave a comment and engage in a discussion so that we can better, as a whole, understand these games that happen. Well, the first game we're going to be going over with this, and I will be doing more throughout the week, is going to be the Atlantic Showdown playoffs, where we're going to be starting with Fnatic versus Misfits in the decider match. Now, in my opinion, this match was very exciting to watch and was actually one of the more impactful matches throughout the entirety of the event. So I hope that you guys, as I unpause it, enjoy the analysis that I provide for this. But again, if you guys have any thoughts about what you think, is wrong, right, whatever, definitely let me know. But so to kind of start off, I've gone over this about 2 times to kind of get an idea of what's going on in the series. The defense from Fnatic ends up running something very interesting. They end up running it's Misfits. They switch the titles. It will get fixed in a moment, but they end up running a triple DPS defense. Now, it's different than normally what you see with the double tank. Sometimes back in the day, we used to see Symmetra and Junkrat along with a Reaper, along with a McCree. There were different ways of running this server room strategy, but they aren't going to be running anything along the lines of a server room strategy. They're going to be picking up the Genji because they want to play more mobile and out and about and use the edges of the catwalk, the boxes on the top left, and they also want to use that just the high ground control and mobility to take advantage of the offense and put them in bad positions. But Fnatic's going to end up doing some pretty cool things here, but they end up running, pretty standard lineup, I'd say, for this map. You do see a lot more Roadhog on this map because there are just a lot of great angles that Roadhog can take advantage of, specifically down through that where the point is captured, which will be gone after PTR. But also, if you go up into that left room over there, there is, of course, that huge access to the stairwell where you're able to quickly, go in there, get it set up, and that's where you're going to be seeing Cool Matt go for the hooks, because there's a lot of areas that he can duck around and hide in. But again, so the defense here, they do want to think about this kind of like spread out nature, and so they can have the Reaper jump in from catwalk, they can have the Genji come in from a different angle, he can go all the way around if he wants and come in the flank, and that's something that you do want to think about too. I mean, I talk about this a lot in my casts, but you want to be presenting the enemy team with multiple threats, and not only in the sense of like if you're both standing at the same angle and you're presenting that threat, well then it's really only one threat. It's a threat from one area with 2 heroes, right? But if you're able to get your heroes into multiple different positions, i.e. Soon is playing way back near the server room and on the back catwalk a lot of the time, you see Crew is playing on the boxes, and Zapri is moving around to present that different threat, that different angle. So again, I'd like to emphasize here that with this defense, if you're going to run something like this, it's critical that you stay mobile. And look, Zapri's chasing them down. He's following them. He's making it hard for them to feel comfortable pushing in. But this is where I think Fnatic does something really smart. Now, whether or not they specifically intended this to be the outcome, they end up going all the way through server room. Now, they're aware that the team isn't really using server room, so like, fine, we're going to take over server room. We're going to get control of it. Then they end up going through observatory and getting onto the payload, in which a position that the defense has to get onto the payload and fight them, right? Like, and that's normal. The defense is always in a position where the offense is going to be bringing the payload to the defense in some respects, but in that specific position, it made it so that the payload was advancing away from the defense, and so that the defense had to consistently be under pressure of this idea that if we don't get on the payload sooner than later, they're going to have better angles, they're going to have better control of the payload, and it ends up putting in position, I believe it was Soon, who switches over to a Tracer, but he was on that McCree. He ends up taking a headshot from Cool Matt, as he's just able to turn around and quickly get that right click, but that allows them to get the payload very quickly. So again, I'd like to emphasize that take note of what's going on in the games. Like, take that extra second. Fnatic goes under, and then the second offense, they go, wow, well, you know what? We got jumped on. They're not really playing server room. Let's just hard push server room. Let's take control of it ourselves. There's a large health pack in there. We can wrap around, gain control of observatory, and also we can then push the defense into a position where they have to engage us. Otherwise, they're going to just get absolutely manhandle, which is what ended up happening in that situation, right? They couldn't do anything they wanted to, because if they did, right, they would have already had to. And the way in which they had to engage was disjointed. And it's hard to, I guess that's the other side of it, right? Misfits is running a harder to execute lineup than I would say that Fnatic is. At the end of the day, Misfits' lineup is going to be a lot more about getting on the offense and getting those multiple angles, you know, coming in with the Genji and stuff like that. But if it doesn't work, right, like you have 3 DPS, they're very squishy, that's 600 HP across one target. You can't really take brawled out fights, you can't really take prolonged fights, and that's where Fnatic is going to have a slight advantage in those longer fights, right, because they have both the Reinhardt and the Winston, and they have the, you know, the double support, whereas Misfits is only going to be running the 2 healers and the 1 body to really fight it out. But again, I do think that Misfits lineup is very good on this map. I think it's actually ends up working out pretty well for them throughout this defense, but at the same time, it is I think a higher risk defense because there's less mechanisms, right? Like Genji can get in the backline and do a lot, but Winston himself does a lot of that action by getting in the backline, right? You can play Winston multiple different ways. Winston can be a frontline brawler, using that bubble to help out his team, but he can also be used to jump into the background and get on those back targets and eat them alive. But again, Misfits here, they're only running a Winston. They're not running any Reinhardt, and I really do want to emphasize that because the way that they're playing this is actually something that we've been seeing more lately. Now, before, and when I first analyzed Gibraltar, it was back when I was looking at Cloud9 games, they would sit a few in the side room, they would sit one down below, and then they'd sit Surefour with one other target or 2 other targets, the Mercy and the Winston up on the high ground. But here they're sitting everyone up there. Everyone on the defense except for Zapri, who's going to be in charge again of this flanking position. He's the one who has to get into the back of the offense and make them feel uncomfortable, make their engages less clean, less well executed, because they have to be factoring in Genji's behind us. Let's call the Genji, let's target the Genji, let's focus the Genji. But it just strictly does not end up working at all for them. And again, I'd like to emphasize that here, I think a lot of what ends up going wrong for them is that they just don't have the same engage potential, and also Zapri ends up getting picked off there. Overall in this series, I actually think Zapri ends up having a pretty rough series for himself, and I think that does come to bite them a little bit. Misfits will definitely be getting that into the next map, as there is a moment where I really want to highlight that. But for now, again, the offense is doing exactly what they want to. They're consistently moving forward. They're taking the fights, and they're also, again, they're not using all of the ultimates that they don't have to. Something that I talk about in my cast a lot is that as the defense, you're on this onus of using your ultimates in a staggered nature. Because if you use all of your ultimates at once, you're gone in the next fight, right? Like, well, we used 6 ultimates, we wiped them, great, but they still have 4. So they come in, they take their fight, they only need 2, so they can even save 2 to guarantee that the payload gets converted if they're really thinking ahead. But that's where you want to be thinking about in that respect, is that you need to be thinking about your ultimate management. I think Fnatic does a good job of that on the offense. But so defense here wants to gain ground. That's another thing that I should kind of bring up here, and I haven't really talked about too much in my cast, but a lot of the defense loves to engage aggressively. And that is because, well, right now the game is an aggressive natured game, and the defense is in a natural disadvantage, always falling back, ceding ground, and having to deal with the fact that a payload is constantly advancing on them. The amount of map space that is available to them to defend gets smaller and smaller as the payload moves forward. So the defense, to try to fix that, try to resolve that in this meta, one of the solutions is to get very, 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 very aggressive. And if you're very, very aggressive, you can set up those initiations, you can get on the defense or offense, and you can push them back, and you can set up in those positions, right? Like, if they would have won that fight there at the corner where the payload was, then what ended up happening is they would have been able to get left side catwalk control, right side bridge control, and they could have set up that crossfire. But either way, the offensive push-in does not end up working at all, and Fnatic ends up getting themselves a pretty good time on this map. But again, I think that a lot of this was because of maybe experimentation from Misfits. They were running a triple DPS setup, and I don't think that Zapri ever really had a big impact throughout that game. I mean, the one Dragon Blade that he really had was countered out by a Transcendence timed well from the side of Kusta as they were pushing into the section of the shuttle section towards the last fight actually of the shuttle section is where that Dragon Blade ends up getting used. But I think it's very interesting that they go for a triple DPS setup, especially in a world where this is a map where you will see Roadhog more. And it is worth noting, at this point in the tournament, of course, their already Complexity has been playing, they've been doing very well, and Harblue, one of the most influential Roadhogs of recent, has definitely been shaping people's influence on this map. I mean, a lot of people will go up and say, you know, Cloud9, Cloud9, Complexity, Roadhog, Gibraltar, no brainer. It's going to be there. Harblue's going to do his thing. He's going to flank. You know that you can count on Harblue doing it. But if it works so well for them, and of course, you know, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they just get called out on it because Roadhog, I mean, at a certain point, it is a thought out strategy. Teams are aware of what Harblue wants to do, so they will just outright counter Harblue. But simultaneously, that doesn't mean that other teams can't do it. And so I do think that there's an interesting logic that you have to be biting into there. You have to be thinking about, well, if this map has become popular for this hero, right, do we really want to be running a Genji? I mean, I think there are definitely other options they could have run, but nonetheless, it is a strategy that you can think about doing. I don't think in a vacuum it's bad. I just think uniquely against the way that Fnatic was playing it, it's hard to run the triple DPS. But now we're going to be seeing a much, much more standard, quote-unquote, defense coming out here. As it is going to be triple tank though, and that is something that we'll get into that in a second. But both teams here end up going triple tank. But Misfits, the opposite logic here. They're going to be going for a triple tank that's a lot more beefy and fighting in an area, right? You have the Zarya that's able to bubble up the Roadhog. You're able to get the Winston bubbled up as he initiates. You can protect your teammates. You suck them in with the Graviton Surge once you farm it up. But you have very good targets to get high energy to farm up your ultimate quickly. Whereas Fnatic is going to be going for kind of like a jumpy defense. Now, this, unfortunately, at the beginning, they end up losing Vonethil, and that's kind of a mistake you have to be very careful of, especially because it's the Lucio, and this is something I need to start talking about more in my cast and bringing up. But when you're a Lucio and you get picked off early, there's two major things that happen. One, your team is never going to be able to disengage cleanly because they don't have the amped up speed boost, and number two, that the fight going throughout it is always going to be a little bit weaker because, yeah, you can be on AoE healing, but a lot of the time you'll see the Lucios at the higher level are going to be sitting on speed as much as possible, especially on the offense, because you can rely on the cart healing, you can rely on the Harmony Orb, and mobility equals positioning, which equals better fights. So losing your Lucio at the beginning makes it very hard, and honestly, in a lot of ways, this is where I think Misfits is just able to dominate the fight, because there's no positional advantage at all for Fnatic, and they couldn't even get it if they wanted to, right? Because once the Lucio is down, how do you outmaneuver the other team? You can't. If you're going to be running, in the Lucio, it is a Zenyatta meta right now, but Lucio is still incredibly important, and I think that he does decide a lot of the fights at the end of the day, right? Like, your ability to initiate as a team, speed boost in, but again, losing the Lucio at the beginning here, I think bites Fnatic big time, and that might be one of the reasons they end up losing this map. I mean, they end up losing it by 30 seconds, so if you go back and say, well, if Vonethil didn't get picked off, what would have ended up happening? Not exactly sure. But nonetheless, they end up continuing to move on here, and at a decent click. I do want to note also Fnatic taking their time, that they do need to get control of the shuttle room, and they're not rushing to it. A lot of the teams, when they were losing this weekend, and as well as in any event, when you start to get really far behind in tempo and pressure, you feel this need to get out there and fight, to get out there and trade, to get out there and create opportunities for your team. But Fnatic does the right thing. They wait for everyone so that they can take a better fight as a team, and they unfortunately were not at all ready for Soon, who ends up coming with this Deadeye, and this is a situation where I feel like those kind of plays are very, very rewarding when used properly, but at the same time they can also come to bite you, right? Like right now, like Soon, since he went for that high risk play, he ended up getting behind the enemy team, and yeah, he had the angles to go ahead and get the great Deadeye, but he also leaves himself vulnerable, and then that's where Buds can come in from the back and clean him up, and this actually gives Fnatic some time to catch up here. I mean, honestly, after that Deadeye, after the ways that the plays went down, I really honestly would have expected this to go for Misfits in a lot faster of a time, but again, Buds coming in, the risky play from Soon maybe ends up biting them a little bit here, but nonetheless, we again have Zapri here going to be playing the Tracer, and this Graviton Surge, I sat back and I looked at this Graviton Surge, and like I really just couldn't find a reason to use it. I think Crew felt like he had maybe a little bit, or maybe he felt like Zapri could have gotten the ult up a little bit quicker or something, but they end up using the Graviton Surge there for almost little to no reason, and it ends up biting them a little bit, but they do end up taking the point here on the next push, if I recall correctly, and it ends up working out well for them. But nonetheless, so far the defense, it's interesting to see, right? It's still a similar logic of running a Winston. Now, Bud's, of course, running over to the Reaper. That's going to be a lot stronger here in the shuttle phase. There's a lot of angles. There's not a lot of enclosed areas that he can really get a great Death Blossom off. You have the shuttle, you have the left side room, you have below, underground, basement, whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, you have the right side of shuttle room and that stair room. And then there are a few, like, rooms that you can get a great Death Blossom off. But simultaneously, really, Reaper is a very strong angle controlling hero here, because he can hide in the shuttle, he can blow targets up as they move into the shuttle, he can deny, and as you saw, Soon with his aggressive play ended up putting himself in a position where he got cleaned up by that Reaper, but also you can drop down from the catwalk onto the payload and do a lot of damage that way. Regardless though, Reaper I feel like is definitely a lot stronger at the beginning than he is on this point. I definitely feel like back in the day when Soldier was at his peak, That's what honestly, like, and I'm surprised that we don't see that still. Like, at the end of the day, I think Soldier, yeah, McCree is better than Soldier at the highest level. If you can hit 2 headshots, McCree's going to kill targets. But I do feel like on this specific map, I definitely still have a gut feeling that Soldier is going to be a very strong pick, regardless if you can play him well. Because the amount of output that Soldier can use, especially with a Discord Orb, especially with an amp up from a Mercy, either one, it doesn't really matter. And just sitting on top of that shuttle, using the Biotic Field to never get knocked off, and consistently outputting damage to consistently put the offense in an awkward position. Whereas, you know, McCree is less consistent. He's more bursty. He's more shot, headshot, roll, shot, headshot, and then he has to reload, right? He could get 2 kills, maybe 3, without having to reload. He can use the combat reload to save himself time, but at the same time, as far as over a minute of time, Soldier's going to be able to consistently output more damage. But nonetheless, the last section ends up coming up here. So there's a few things that I really want to talk about here. But the first thing is that control of the catwalk. I really felt like IDDQD, and this started with CoolMatt. The first thing that happened is CoolMatt immediately boosted up onto the catwalk, and he ends up getting control of it. He wants to make sure that no one can steal it from IDDQD. And then that's when IDDQD goes and sets up. Very small thing that I thought was really cool, and they end up doing it twice, where CoolMatt will pre-control the high ground that they want for Soon, and he even ends up going up there to back up Soon for the Deadeye. But they go aggressively with this Deadeye, and this Graviton Surge was very well thought out by Crew. They end up focusing down Soon first as a team, which is another important thing you do want to think about. You know, if they're going to pop a Transcendence, you know they have it, it's been a while, you have to ask yourself, who do we want to kill first? And in that situation, definitely Soon is a good target because of his amount of damage, or sorry, IDDQD is a good target because of how much damage he can put out. But nonetheless, the offense ends up getting in a good position here, and this is something that I really want to talk about here. So this Mei wall, a lot of the commentary and analysts about this was like, uh-oh, what is this Mei wall? Why did that Mei wall go there? It didn't end up doing anything. But honestly, I feel like this is something that we'll be starting to see a lot more, and we're gonna go ahead and go back just to watch this one part. But I definitely feel like this is really cool. So if you pay very close attention, the Mei walls from the left bulge of the doorway. If you look right now, there's those 2 canisters, the doorway, and then what she'll do is she'll ice wall from the canister out diagonally. And what that does is it creates a barrier for her team to be able to get out of the spot. Gibraltar is notorious. I mean, you guys have, I'm sure you've experienced it in your rank play. If you're a competitive player, I'm sure you've experienced it in a match. But once you lose control of this area, those 2 doors are so hard to access. But if you pick a Mei and you put a wall in front, you create an artificial protection, right? And you'll actually see that Skipjack's Earth Shatter gets absorbed by it. And so all of the heroes can end up getting through, or at least I believe they end up getting through. And even if they do get hit by the Earth Shatter ends up being, the damage that they would have taken afterwards ends up getting protected by the facet that they have that ice wall to protect them. It doesn't end up working, and they still end up losing the match by literally about, 30 seconds or so. But I still think that this isn't a very important thing to point out, that ice wall, it wasn't just that they wanted to block it themselves in necessarily, but that ice wall was very intelligent to create space so that the defense could get out. Does it end up working? No, but I definitely think it's something that you can continue to use throughout any maps that you have those situations where the defense gets caught in the spawn. Now we'll be going on to the next game, guys. Alright, so let's kind of get into the psychology of the match too. I think that that's something that I overly talk about in my casts and stuff like that, but I do feel like it is an important part of it. So you have to think about the minds of Fnatic right now. Now, of course, we know the outcome of the series. It's something that's happened. We can go back and we can say, okay, this is what happened. But Fnatic right now, they've lost by 30 seconds. There's 2 ways that you can take that as a player. You can feel like you got cheated, like there's things that you could have done and that you could have done better, or that it was a close match and that you can beat them, right? You will beat them, and that you just need another opportunity, right? And I really feel like this is where Fnatic takes their minds, or at least is much better at getting that positive momentum going. In Misfits, I feel like there are a few mistakes that ends up happening throughout the series, but I really want to start with, of course, when we get to it on the defense of Misfits. Zapri ends up having a horrendous game. But we will get to that in a moment. We're going to look first at the defense. Very standard set of heroes. The other thing that I've kind of started to notice about this composition is that this composition, specifically the Zarya, Reaper, McCree, and Zenyatta, are all heroes that don't require their ultimates to do a lot. At the end of the day, yes, a Death Blossom is amazing. Graviton is amazing. Deadeye, amazing. Transcendence, more than amazing. But with those heroes by themselves, they do so much, right? healing from the Discord, or from the Harmony, damage from the Discord, high DPS output yourself. McCree can two-shot targets and take them out. Cool Matt on the Zarya. Zarya is just an amazing hero. If you guys haven't practiced her or played her or experimented with her, I would yourselves. She can do insane amounts of damage. She does 160 damage per second with a full charge on that left click. She does 96 per lob on a full charge. And then Buds. I mean, Reaper is literally, in my opinion, the epitome of a hero that does everything he needs to out of the gate. He comes out of the gate, his shotgun shred targets, he has the health globes after he gets kills, and yeah, he is a ramping hero that as there's more health globes down on the ground from more kills, he survives longer, he snowballs. But still, out of the gate, Reaper does exactly what you need him to do. Huge amounts of damage and consistent amounts of damage. What ends up going wrong for Misfits here? Well, they're running, again, a very standard D offense as well. They're not going to be running the Reinhardt. And this is something that's interesting, and honestly, I think it kind of gives away a little bit of what Fnatic wants to, or what Misfits wants to do here. If you're going to be running a Winston instead of a Reinhardt, it's very obvious you're not going to necessarily be pushing through the archway. You're going to be going for an engage in the backside. You're going to be trying to clean up market, and then once you've cleaned up market, you want to then go ahead and get on the point and stabilize and take it over. But nonetheless, they end up taking it. They end up going with the Winston. They end up doing very well here, and I think this is partially because Zapri here does get unanswered, and he has a very good moment as a player. I think that this is probably one of his best games of the series. He ends up having a lot of trouble in the rest of the series, but Buds is a hero that or a player that really I think needs to be highlighted here. So I think the analyst did point it out well, is that Soon and IDDQD, both of them strong players, both of them have been lighting up. But really, when you get down to the secondary part of the match, or the secondary DPS, right, you ask yourself, Buds versus Zapri. Well, overall, I would already have to be evaluating Buds as doing a little bit more, and he's starting to find his ground. He's starting to find his footing. It definitely feels that way based upon the way that they were playing on Gibraltar. Of course, I'm biased because I kind of know what's going to happen later on in the series, and Zapri ends up having a very, very, very bad game, and we'll go ahead and figure out why that ends up happening. But regardless, it definitely, I feel like this series, the two big factors were Buds and Cool Matt, and especially Cool Matt personally. I think that Zarya is a hero that can literally carry games, and we will get to it on the King of the Hill, but Zarya ends up doing so much, or Cool Matt ends up doing so much on that Zarya with his high charge, never dying, getting so much damage out. In fact, he starts lighting up triple kills over and over again. And that's what you want from your Zarya player, right? Zarya is not just a hero that sets up ultimates. She provides your team with bubbles to stop overaggression, to make overaggression safer. She gives huge amounts of damage. I mean, yeah, she's not at high charge right now, but at the same time, right, like, she's still doing a fair bit of damage. But this is a really cool play. So what ends up happening here is that all of the defense ends up jumping down, and Flame has done a really good job pointing this out in his VoD analysis, is that you want to, as the defense, like, you're caught in this, we'll go ahead and go back and watch that, but you're caught in this, like, dichotomy, right? So hopefully we skip back to a decent angle on it, but okay, no, unfortunately we'll go back 2 more seconds. We want to go, so right here, the defense is stuck on this high ground, and they have to control the high ground because they need high ground control. It's part of the defensive advantage. You can rain down shots with Zarya, you can rain down shots with McCree, you can rain down shots with the Zenyatta, and also your Reinhardt just sitting his barrier up there gives your team so much space to do that. But simultaneously, you cannot contest the payload. It is not like Dorado or Route 66 where you can stand on big rolls and contest the payload. You have to jump down to contest it. So then, how do you do that, right? You have to make it clean, you have to make it effective, and you have to not, mess it up at all, because if you do, you wipe, and then the the offense is going to be able to get back up on the high ground, the set of Misfits here, and they're going to be able to control high ground. They're going to be able to constrict you in that little door spawn over to... Anyways, but up the bridge, right, is where that door is, and if they have control of high ground, they can constrict you in there, they can control that high ground catwalk, and then they're able to shoot you through that main door. It's really hard for you to get that payload contested all as it rounds the corner, and it's really important that the defense engages properly here. But this is where I really like what ends up happening from Soon and from Crew, and specifically from Nevik. So Crew is kind of aware of that, right, and he hears the speed up, he hears the amp, so he ends up just throwing the Graviton Surge on the cart. It ends up grouping up a lot of the defense. But then the second part that ends up happening is that Soon ends up channeling his Death Blossom in a Graviton Surge, and on face value, that is not a smart decision, right? You are channeling your ultimate into an enemy team setup, but because Nevix has the Transcendence, and again, coordination, communication, it's so huge in this kind of game, they know that Soon is not going to die during the Death Blossom. And if I recall correctly too, before that ends up happening, they end up picking off Kusta, he's dead throughout the fight, so they know that there's not going to be... No, okay, never mind. Kusta is still alive. So Kusta just ends up not using his Transcendence at all. Interesting position there too for him. Actually, no, now I remember this. I really don't know what Kusta was doing there. I wish I had a replay client and could go back through, and I'll probably go back through at some point and watch again, but Kusta could have Transcendence there. He had it available, and Nevix ends up using his immediately upon the use of the Graviton Surge. Now, Kusta might be thinking of the logic, well, if we use the ultimate, then we're going to lose the fight, and then, or we might win the fight, but then we're going to lose the next one, and we're going to lose a lot of tempo. But regardless, Kusta ends up making the logic that they hold it. So, not exactly sure. Definitely something I think you guys could read into, because Nevix was right on target. Of course, offense, there is that easy scapegoat logic. We just want to hold our ultimates for longer term positioning or longer term fight taking. But nonetheless, it's interesting that Kusta doesn't end up transcendencing that. Soon gets himself a huge Death Blossom inside of the Graviton Surge. And also, I mean, but that's where it's kind of cool, right? Is that, and I like this play from Buds. This was really smart non-tell thinking, right? He's thinking in his head, the McCree is shooting us down main, right? But like he's falling back. He's not really doing anything. There's something going wrong there. That's not a standard play. He wants to kind of push up a little bit. He wants to have a tank with him to back him up, and yet he backs off, right? Well, as we push forward there, why would he have pushed up? Well, possibly to gain control for a teammate to camp there. So Buds goes, worst case, I poke that corner, no one's there. But I'm going to poke the corner, check your corners, check your corners, check your corners. There are so many times on this map, right here on the right, or of course we were just going to go by it, but right as that door to the left right there, where right now where Buds is, that spot has claimed so many teams' pushes just because they don't check the corner. And now it's become more common. But again, check your corners, and Bud's doing a good job there. But this Death Blossom ends up doing a little bit of fair bit of damage, but the offense ends up just sacrificing it basically. This is something that I feel like I've been casting with Scribe a lot lately, and he's been doing a really good job pointing it out. But the defense, again, they're on this onus of we can only use 1 or 2 ultimates to fight 5 or 6. If the defense has all of their ultimates up, we cannot use all of them. We have to save some of them, because if we win the fight, if we lose the fight, then it doesn't matter, right? Well, maybe we should have used the ults, and there's that logic, and you can bite into that. But the other bite into logic is you have to be thinking in long term, right? You can't just be thinking for the current fight sometimes. You have to be thinking of the long term. And if you win that fight, what do you have for the follow-up fight? So the offense, knowing that, is just going to say, fine, use your ultimates. We're going to go ahead and sacrifice for the most part, and we're going to go ahead and let you eat up those ultimates. Zebosai ends up using a sound barrier here, and I'm not entirely sure why. I feel like they could have just eaten the Graviton Surge, but part of the logic I recently did on the Ultimate Management, I was kind of caught off guard because I'd watched the video a few times, and I went back and I watched it, and I missed something, and it was that they ended up using Sound Barrier to trade out ultimates, or to force the trade out. So I wonder if that was a similar logic from Zebosai, saying, you know, hey, we do have the Transcendence, I can just go ahead and use my Sound Barrier to go ahead and bait them into thinking they're going to have to use more, and then we can go ahead and retake the fight with 5 and go ahead and win it from there. But regardless, the defense so far from Fnatic has been pretty stable and pretty effective. They've been maintaining control of that catwalk, and it is so important that you do so. It gives you natural control of your flanks. It gives you natural control of this entire section of the map. You have an easy jump down spot, and it's going to end up putting Misfits in a very good time for their cap. So now we move on to the next offense. Now this is where I think there are some super cool things going on, and this is where, again, this is kind of like an analysis of what Fnatic did, right? And kind of like the questions that I had for Misfits. But at the same time, guys, like if you see things, you have an idea, you think that I'm not properly representing something, please do let me know, because the only way to better understand this game, I mean, this is partially for myself too. I do sit down, I do my own VoD review, but you know, a lot of people have asked for me to go ahead and sit down and do it, you know, recorded or at least live, something that I also need to think about. So I am kind of walking through it myself mentally, kind of trying to go through the logic, the steps, the A versus the B leads to the C, and kind of figure out what the teams want to do. And if it's wrong, definitely let me know, because that's the only way for me to learn. And also opening up the discussion, I think it's very important. I mean, when you go back and you look at games like, you know, my always example, my default example is going to be Dota, because I played it for so long and studied it for so long. But at the beginning, the thoughts that people had were very, very inferior to the thoughts down the line, because people challenged each other, they engaged with each other, and they deliberated with each other as a community to get a better understanding of the game. So I definitely encourage you guys to be doing the same. But nonetheless, the defense here from Misfits, again, standard. Pretty much just the standard setup. And again, I'll go back to my logic. I really think that this lineup is amazing out of the gates. There's basically no weakness to this lineup out of the gates, right? Like, yeah, air threats. Nevix soon, take care of them. Up close, brawly threats. You have Zapri, you have Nevix, you get the Discord Orb, you get the Shred, you know, Buds on a Roadhog. You get the shred Zarya because she is a pretty big-bodied character. Like, at the end of the day, she is a smaller tank body compared to, of course, like the big bodies of like D.Va, Winston, Roadhog, Reinhardt, but she still is a bigger body, and you can still fit that entire reticule on her upper chest as well as the neck, and that's what you want to do as Reaper 2, right? You either want to decide for the meat shots, you want to go for that full punch into the body, or you want to go for that neck shot, because part of the bullets hitting the head will make it so half of your shot crits, where the other half is guaranteed to hit in that upper chest body. And you'll notice that that's where a lot of the Reapers will aim when they're going for the kill, but when they're going for just the sheer damage against like a Roadhog, sometimes they will just go for those meaty body shots, guaranteed full 200 damage, or exactly how much it is, as consistently as possible. But nonetheless, Fnatic's going to be going for a very interesting strategy here. Now, I think that this is where I kind of want to bring it up. You, throughout this, and definitely go back, and I'll be linking the links to the VoDs in the description. But Zapri does not end up ulting this entire game, if I recall correctly, but he ends up being sit at 6 to 70%. But this is so cool, right? So they're running a triple tank. They're running Stoop, Comat, Buds. They're running a Reinhardt, Zarya, and Roadhog, right? And they immediately notice, right? There's no rollers, there's no Junkrat grenades coming out of the side of Misfits, right? So what do? Well, running triple tank. Let's just get in a closed space. We're going to bubble people up. They're not going to be able to stop them from shooting the bubbles. We're going to also have the shield to block the damage as we move in. And then we have Buds to hook targets inside. And you'll notice that as they go in, Skipjack tries to charge. He gets hit by quite a serendipitous in some way Zarya shot that knocks him slightly to the right, which prevents him from actually hitting the charge right there. But still, why would you go into this, right? You're fighting a Zarya, Roadhog, Reinhardt in an enclosed space. It's just very confusing for Misfits. Like, it was very smart play from Fnatic, right? Because, like, what do you do against that? If you go in there and challenge them, you're going to get eaten alive. The Roadhog's going to shred you close up. They're going to hook you and pull you in. Buds just absolutely lights it up on the Roadhog. He misses the first hook, but then hits the 3. I mean, that's kind of like the mortal nature of playing this game. Of course, is sometimes it's obvious that you miss the first one, but then you go off later on. But that's what ends up mattering, right? They end up getting a huge setup for their team by pushing through and just clearing out that space. And I mean, think about it from an overhead view, right? You have the map itself as the market, and you've already controlled that entire enclosed side. Where's the defense going to go? High ground maybe on that little stairwell control, but that gives them such bad angles to hold on to the market area. And then on top of that, you have these great angles to poke around, hook one in, poke around, hook one in. Your Reinhardt can just barrier you. You have the Zarya to continually bubble you. And I just thought that was an incredibly smart decision. But nonetheless, I think the Fnatic continues to move in here, but Misfits has a very smart play. So again, they've lost a lot of tempo. Misfits is thinking, oh crap, right? Like, we need to hold. So they go for an engage here. And you look at their ultimates, right? You see Crew with the Graviton Surge, and Soon does have the Deadeye. But this is where I think it's super important to note the small details of the game, and it's really hard to point this out as it goes on. But if you pay attention and watch this on slow-mo, Kusta's ultimate ends up blocking the shot that would have killed Vonathil. Now, he does get the 1 kill onto IDD Cutie. He does a fair bit of damage onto Buds and a fair damage onto Stoop, but the Transcendence itself ends up protecting Vonathil. Now, that's more serendipitous than it is actual and intentional thing, but it is something that you can begin to manipulate as players. Because, again, using these small, tiny things, if Vonathil doesn't die, he has Sound Barrier. And you guys can see that the impact that that'll have as the fight unfolds. But again, I think that this play by itself that Misfits go for, very intelligent. There ends up being 3 skulls, but Vonathil doesn't end up dying. He ends up, I'm pretty sure, it's hard to see. I would have to go into the replay if there was one to actually see what happens in slow motion. But nonetheless, I'm 90% sure it gets absorbed. Vonathil still has his ultimate to use. And they end up taking the fight pretty handily by the end, if I recall correctly. They do get pushed back at the beginning, but they do continue to push forward. And this is something also that I'd like to point out, is that the defense has this natural advantage. Offense has this natural advantage on payload maps, right? Like, not only does the payload heal you, but the defense has to consider the positioning of the payload, right? They can't just defend an area in a vacuum. If the payload is near the point, they have to consider that. So the defense is always going to be in a bad position or onus. And once again, the offense, instead of going for that open control that you normally see with most teams, honestly, is going for that open control first. They go through that room. They get Buds in a position. The other small thing I really want to point out about Buds in this lineup is normally you think of Roadhog as an ult magnet, right? He just gives the other team ultimate. They shoot him, they get ultimate, it's easy. However, I really like what Buds does. Previously on the first point, and just right now, you guys can go back and watch, but his HP, when he is down and not under duress of his life, right, he was at 30 HP, I think maybe like 100 HP. He was still not under duress of losing his life, so he does not take a breather. He waits until the fight's over so his supports can also get the ultimate charge. And that, again, this plays like a dual nature, right? Yeah, Roadhog can benefit the enemy team by giving them more ultimates, but if you get on a good steamrolling session and you can keep hooking and hooking and hooking and just bringing them in, taking a breather and hooking them, you know what you can do when they're dead is not take a breather and let your supports get their ultimates as soon as possible. Kusta just used Transcendence at the beginning of this section of the map, and he's already at 96% because he can just sit the Harmony Orb on Buds. But again, we'll go back to the other point. Zapri, 40%. He's been on this ultimate charge the entire time. He has not had a good game, and you would expect him to, right? He's playing against two big-bodied targets, the Reinhardt, the Roadhog, and he's still just not having a good game. So again, I think it's incredibly important to note that there's small details that's been going on here. The Roadhog consistently giving Kusta better ultimate charge, the Roadhog not healing himself up to do that, the Roadhog and the Zarya and the Reinhardt sticking together and bullying into spots. But this is really why I feel like Colemat starts to light up. There are a few plays that he ends up making some big ones, but there was also, on the last defense, there was that a play where they end up pushing back and wasting a Transcendence. But Deadeye, just a zone, mainly. This is what you want to be doing with the Deadeye right now. Now, of course, PTR is going to change this, so I don't really know what the logic is going to be after PTR, because you're going to lose all of your ultimate once you right-click. Huge Graviton surge from the defense ends up doing quite a bit. They do have the Transcendence, and this is I really disagree with this from Fnatic. They're in an amazing spot on the stopwatch, and Coolmat ends up using his ultimate. Now, I think that this is probably a factor of dialing in, right? Like, as a player, when you are doing that well, comms are flying. You know, Reinhardt high ground, yo, I'm shooting this guy, I'm getting shot, guys, I'm down. You know, there's just so much information, data, that there should be, because teams should be communicating. But Coolmat, within that sea of data, might have gotten lost and ends up using his Graviton Surge when really he didn't have the resources around him. And it's hard for him to dial out and truly see the outcome of the fight, right? He has to be focusing on dodging, shooting, aiming. But he does end up wasting the Graviton Surge, so it's something that you guys can think about when you go back and study your own play, is ask yourself, did I really need to ultimate there? But in that situation, I think it's a little bit easier to say that it's not necessary, but this is where I think the offense makes some really, really smart plays. Now, the first one is that they end up speed boosting the, with the sound barrier, the, Whole Hog. Now, normally you would do something, you would save that combination for, like, possibly a upcoming Death Blossom, though they don't have one. You'd possibly save it for other things, but Buds is going to be one of their primary DPS threats, so they're going to use that, and that's going to zone back these sections of the defense. That allows the Reinhardt to push forward to the left side and go ahead and barrier out that Deadeye. Both of the DPS threats go down first, and then from there they're able to just stick on the cart, use the amp up healing, and just consistently clean up every target that gets in their way, and they end up taking the map. I do think one thing Stoop could have done there like a little bit better is that once the Deadeye was gone, he could have considered dropping the barrier, because they had the sound barrier on everyone and they were healing up quite a bit, but nonetheless, they end up winning that map pretty handily in a lot of respects. And again, if we go back real quickly, I'd like to take note of Zapri's ultimate charge at the end of the game. Again, I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, you know, Zapri's a horrible player, you know, they should kick him off the team, he didn't hold his own weight, whatever. People have bad games. But if you're going to be looking at this as a player, you need to be saying to yourself, Zapri doing more could have made a difference, right? A minute of difference. If he would have gotten one decent Death Blossom, one decent set of kills, but unfortunately he just never really has a good game this game, and that might be one of the driving factors, but I definitely think regardless it is at least an important factor to the outcome of this series. So again, guys, so far, it's really just been a show of Fnatic doing some very smart things, but at the same time, I do think that there has been a lot of challenges presented from the side of Misfits, especially on that first map. But again, Fnatic looked like they were going to win it. It just came down to the fact that they didn't get the best defense that they wanted. Alright guys, so now we're going to change gears. We're going to go into the King of the Hill. Series so far has been pretty interesting. Apologize for the the skippy editing, as this is my first VoD analysis, so some of this I am just kind of like, I'm not trying, in a lot of ways, everything that's been recorded, I'm just pretty much straight out putting out there, but I am going to go ahead and cut out some of the parts that are, you know, like, stuff like that, or, you know, just mess ups, whatever. Cut out the small errors. But all the logic, all the ideas, putting it out there straightforward. And again, so what I wanted to highlight, what I wanted to highlight is that when you look at King of the Hill, it's a little bit different than it is on their payload maps. Now, a little bit different, it might be a bit of an understatement, but when you look at King of the Hill, it's primarily about, in my opinion, like two factors, but like those two factors can deviate into others. But the first one is going to be team fighting. and or I guess ultimate usage, I guess would be the big one. But team fighting and ultimate usage. So team fighting is kind of about ultimate usage. Or ultimate usage can be included within it, but I like to keep it separate for at least the ability to look at it as a different factor. But when you look at team fighting, you look at your ability to position, you look at your ability to team shot, and you look at your ability to engage and disengage. Now, positioning leads to engaging and disengaging, so knowing what positions are the best. You know, they're running this hero is going to prefer to set up here, this hero likes to go Tracer, likes to control the far flanks, very natural, it's what she wants to do. She doesn't want to get up in the front like a Reaper does, because she's very squishy, she can take spill damage and just end up dying. So she wants to come in from the flanks, she wants to get those good time pulse bombs, and she wants to get set up, so you do want to position yourself in that respect. And then the second part is team shotting. This is so important in my opinion as far as these games go, and you can see it at the very highest level, and I wish that we had replay clients so I could just sit on IDDQD and like tell you who he targets, and then go to Buds and say, okay, well then when IDDQD was shooting this person, Buds was also shooting this person, and their combination together shreds targets. The example that I go to for this is back when I tried to play Halo competitively, back in Halo 3, what was talked about a lot in the tournaments of that day was this idea of team shotting, right? And in Halo you have a battle rifle, it fires 3 shots, and it takes exactly 12 bullets or 4 bursts to kill a target if you shoot them in the head. Exactly 11. The last bullet isn't needed. But if all 4 players in a 4-on-4 game all shoot 1 burst in the enemy player's head, you can kill 4 versus 1, 4 versus 1, 4 versus 1. And then all of a sudden it's 4 versus 3, 4 versus 2, 4 versus 1. Respawns 4 versus 3, 4 versus 2, 4 versus 1. So if you consistently team shot and clean up targets first, then you create yourself power plays, and it puts yourself in a much better position. And I feel like that's a lot of what Fnatic ends up doing right in these situations, but at the same time, I definitely feel like that this map is very the person who holds the point is naturally going to be in control of this map, I feel, because there's a high ground to it, right? You have to go up to the point can look down on all the threats that are coming there. It's very hard to go for those flanks to the health packs and against a coordinated team, because they can use the shrine, they can use multiple assets of the map to go ahead and prevent your flank from being as effective as possible. And there are just multiple ways to go about it, but nonetheless, I do want to emphasize that when you guys do your analysis or look at King of the Hills, that you guys look at ultimate usage, combos of ultimates, and you look at team fighting, team shotting, positioning, and all those small things. But see, the entire team ends up going here to the side, and soon ends up jumping down from the high ground. There was no one there to really control him to prevent it. But they end up going for the double Graviton Surge here, and this is exactly what I was talking about. I really feel like Cool Matt ends up lighting up a lot here. Now that Graviton Surge, you could say it's questionable for at the time, right? Like you're sitting there, there is the Transcendence coming out from the side of Misfits, and obviously they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with that Transcendence. But if you time the Graviton Surge at the very end of the Transcendence, then 3 seconds, because Graviton Surge is 4 seconds, 22 damage per second, and a certain AoE. If you can time it out perfectly, then you can end up getting it in a position where the Transcendence is over, all the targets are grouped, and you can just start lobbing shot after shot after shot. And again, the Cool Matt also was sitting in incredibly high charge this game, and for most of it, to be honest. But again, I think it's so important that your Zarya player can do so much in these King of the Hills. He ends up getting himself a triple kill at the end, but that ends up being the first map. So again, I spent a lot of that map getting over the overalls of King of the Hill, but I really do want to emphasize it. I feel like at the end of the day, there is just not a big enough emphasis on team shotting in King of the Hills right now. They'll talk about team fighting, they'll talk about positioning, they'll talk about fragging power, and they'll talk about, you know, grouping up, clashing properly. But really, what's the core of that is team shotting, right? The team that is better able to communicate who to shoot at effectively is going to kill the targets faster, is going to get to their positions faster, and is just going to end up doing more. So again, focus on team shots in your King of the Hill. Focus on callouts. Focus on presenting. It's almost an impossible goal, because King of the Hill itself is absolutely hectic, right? You have 6-on-6 just clashing. They're just running into each other, running in. And it's like this constantly just clash, battle. There's no, oh, defense has time to set up, offense has time to set up. No, you don't want to, because the percent's running. So keeping your communication good from the very beginning is very important in King of the Hill, in my opinion, because of the nature of the game just being so clashy, so lack of downtime. I mean, you basically have 10% every single wipe. and you don't even really want to do that. So here, Buds ends up switching over to the Genji. Now, Genji is used a fair bit here on this map from some teams. Specifically, of course, when you look at a default one would be like FaZe now, who used to be Immortals, used to be We United. Shadowburn, his Genji. They'll definitely pick it on this map a lot. They'll definitely see some other teams pick it up, but I really don't personally agree with it against the composition that we're seeing Misfits run. It's very, very hard for the Genji to at all deal with Skipjack, to at all deal with Crew, and they have a lot of natural ways to deal with the Genji. I think actually Zarya is a really good target at dealing with Genji because he can just beam him even during the deflect, and 160 damage a second can kill him in a second and a half if he doesn't properly evade. And then also you already have the Winston built into the lineup, which Genji has a hard time dealing with and killing, and he can just shock the Genji down consistently. So a little bit of a questionable decision, and Buds ends up only, I believe, if I recall, only getting one Dragon Blade this entire King of the Hill fight, and that's really not what you want out of a Genji. You really want to, like, Genji is not... I still feel like we might see Genji after the changes. Now, I hope that they change him around a little bit, and of course I'll get into that in my patch analysis, but I really feel like we'll still see Genji a little bit, because Genji is a hero that he's the opposite of Reaper. He almost requires his ultimate to do a lot, right? Like, yeah, he can dash in, melee, fan, not that specific order because there's a combo to it. Again, I just like to point out soon, maybe a questionable Death Blossom, but the way that he goes about doing it is so smart, because he's sitting there saying, they're all going to group up here, they're all going to fight here, and I may be stuck in here, but you're stuck in here with me, or at least you're choosing to, and I'm going to just shred you apart, and it ends up winning them the fight, even though Cool Mac gets himself a triple kill. Absolutely disgusting play from Zarya once again, but Buds, Dragon Blade used, no value gotten, and I feel like that, yes, Genji can do a lot. He can, if I say the combo correctly this time, Shuriken dash melee and do a lot of damage and almost burst a target, right? Especially if some of those Shurikens go into the head. But at the same time, right, you look at Reaper, you look at Tracer, they can just dash up, sneak up, whatever it is, whichever case, and absolutely eviscerate a target and shred them apart without having to worry about having that ultimate up. And when they do have their ultimate, they're an additional level of wipe. But the difference is that Genji, if he's protected, if he's enabled, is a guaranteed team wipe, because you can Transcendence him, you can bubble him, he can just slice and dice the enemy team apart, and that's why they're decreasing the duration of the ultimate, because they feel like if you use that ultimate, you should be getting value out of it immediately. You shouldn't be just sitting there with a sword for 12 seconds going, ha ha ha, how are you going to fight us now? But at the same time, it doesn't end up working out for them, and I really do feel like it's partially because of the Genji. Buds was absolutely lighting it up earlier on the Reaper, lighting it up on the Roadhog, and I just don't see the logic as to what this counters. Like, again, yeah, it does good against the supports, but so does Reaper, and so does Tracer, right? In the combination of them too, and also a Reaper under a bubble of a Winston can do a lot, but they do end up thinking about it in the logic, I'm sure, that, you know, Winston plus Genji diving the back, getting a lot of damage done. They also have the Tracer to come in from a different angle. You can always Graviton Surge and then slash it away. However, the other big issue with this, and I'll kind of get into this now, is the reason why you want to be running, you know, Reaper or other targets like that instead of Genji right now in the current meta is the same reason why we've seen Tracer become hugely prevalent in King of the Hill. Zenyatta, Transcendence, wreaks havoc on Graviton Surge setups, because naturally you want to do Dragon Blade, naturally you want to do Death Blossom, naturally you want to do ultimates to do damage over time, and you want to get in their faces during that Graviton Surge, and you want to eviscerate them through that. But Transcendence, bam, 300 HP per second. No one in the game can out DPS that. I mean, I don't even know if an amped from a Mercy plus a stem packed Death Blossom can even out DPS a Transcendence. It's 300 HPS. It occurs every second, and it's not. And the way it works in the engine, I'm not sure. I mean, it happens so fast that it ends up just being like bulges of health, just going out to the team. But again, Tracer, Pulse Bomb, 400 damage, pop. Just does the damage. Junkrat, Riptire, another logic. We've been seeing him a little bit more. Partially, I think that's the reason why. And maybe that's also the driving factor as to why we see Ana, just to deal with Transcendence, because Transcendence is just such a good ultimate. Nonetheless, guys, I think that it's very important to note that they end up switching back immediately from Buds on the Genji to this Reaper, and I think that it ends up working out strictly better for them. The side of Misfits goes for the cheese here. This is the only map in all of King of the Hill that really you can consistently run a Bastion. And honestly, I love the way that they end up working with it. So what they do is they set up their entire team around the Bastion. You'll see Fnatic just throws everything at this. They throw the Winston, they throw the Tracer, they throw the Zarya, they throw the Reaper. They literally throw pretty much everyone. Buds ends up surviving in the end and does get away for a little bit. But they end up throwing literally everyone at the Bastion. But they're bubbling him, they're harmonying him, They're giving him AoE healing, and they're protecting him with the stoop bubble, or sorry, the skipjack bubble, or barrier. And then, right, Fnatic goes all in on this Bastion. Well, you're dead now, because you all went to kill one hero, but that one hero's dead, and now you're all dead because the other 5 are focusing on you. And so using your threats to your advantage, diversification of threats is something that comes up in MOBAs a lot, but I think is coming up more and more important here in Overwatch. It's not just you need a star player. Like, yeah, it's great to have your IDD cutie that can just light it up on McCree and dominate targets and absolutely go to town. But if he doesn't have that yin-yang to him, that other threat that focuses or balances the focus of the enemy team so that they can't always deal with IDD cutie first, then you're always going to be losing those games because your star is going to get isolated, your star is going to be dealt with. And I highly encourage that, in the same thing with ranked games, right? If you see a player going off, be like, hey guys, this McCree is getting all the kills, this McCree is going off, we need to shut him down. And if they don't have another DPS threat that can light up and deal with it, you've just shut down their only threat. And so thinking about it as threats and thinking about it as how do you want to go about dismantling it, I think is very important. And yes, Fnatic's right in the logic that we have to kill the Bastion, because if we don't kill the Bastion, he'll kill us all. But that's the benefit of running Bastion when Misfits gets the setup that they want, because the offense, the side of Fnatic, has to engage like that. Otherwise, it's just going to be constantly taking that huge amount of DPS the Bastion gets put out. But soon, eventually switches back over to the Reaper, and they're going to get caught. Oh, this Graviton Surge. I remember this. This was absolutely huge. And I mean, even though you don't end up getting the kills, what happens is Bud walks up and he starts hitting the head point blank. Again, Death Blossom itself does no damage during Transcendence, but that doesn't mean that Reaper himself can't, because he can just focus targets, and this is cool, Matt. Full charge on this Zarya, ends up getting himself a 3k, and he really does light up here in these last 2 games, and so does Buds, but you kind of got to ask yourself this entire game, where has Zapri been? And that's kind of like the hard part as a player, right? You have to take that, and you have to like figure out, you know, was it, or as a team, was it Zapri himself? Was it the way that we were setting him up? Was he just not able to do what he was supposed to do? I definitely want to go back and look at it in that respect, but I definitely feel like Zapri ended up being a remote weak point in this series for them. Nonetheless, the side of Fnatic ends up getting control of the point for a long section here. A cool Matt, again, he's been sitting on every single time the camera goes to him. He's 70 plus charge. He's just absolutely shredding through targets. And I also like to point out how much he uses his left click. It's so important as a Zarya to not rely on your lob when you're in close range. Your lob, yeah, it's easier to hit. It does a lot of damage. But that lightning beam, if you can keep up with the tracking, you can keep ahead of the tick marker, especially with the lag on the internet. I mean, sometimes I have troubles where I'm slightly behind the target, and I end up shooting their like arm, and it like shows the effect that the beam's hitting, but it doesn't hit them. So you have to be very good about the tracking. But if you can consistently get that damage, it's 160 damage per second. You saw how fast he can shred targets. He becomes a damage threat himself. So again, I want to highlight how important it is that Cool Matt himself is doing honestly more than Crew. And when you look at it, pound for pound right now, we have Cool Matt doing a lot on the Zarya. We have Bud's absolutely devastating on his Reaper, and throughout the match, I mean, his Roadhog was incredibly strong on Dorado. And then you go over to the side of Misfits. Well, I definitely feel like Soon is playing pretty well. Nevix has been in the right place at the right time, and Crew's been doing all right, but there hasn't been that step up, right? And is that a factor? I kind of leave that to a question for you guys, because I mean, that's part of doing VoD analysis. Is there's still a lot to learn from this VoD, from these plays, from these players. But I mean, is it a specific situation that ended up putting them in these bad positions, and that those kept arising? Was it individual situations, individual decisions? I'm not entirely sure why they end up being in a position where it just seems like Bud's, IDD, Cutie, and honestly Cool Matt end up doing more than their counterparts. And Cool Matt, especially in winning the duel against Crew, does not help them out. So again, though, they're back on the same map, and notice that they don't go over to the Genji. I think it's a very smart decision. The Genji ended up doing nothing for them. And again, it's a question of, I think Genji is a great hero when he has his ultimate up, but when he doesn't have his ultimate up, it's high risk, high reward. I also really like this from Buds. Like, there was a recent article on the r/competitive Overwatch talking about the fallacy of not bursting Zarya bubbles. Like, hey, if you don't shoot the Zarya bubble, then you just basically gave them immunity for 2 seconds. Why would you even think of that as a good idea when you can just shred them through and kill them in 1 second after the bubble's dead? That's exactly what Buds ends up doing. There's a bubble target in front of him, and he just runs through. Just like, okay, I'm just going to shoot on through you until I get to your support. And then Nevix in the corner is like, uh-oh, I'm in a corner, and there's a Reaper in front of me. He ends up going down, and small advantages end up making bigger advantages. I think is kind of like the point I'll bring out here in this last game, is that those small wins of the fights is that Kusta got his ultimate first. Kusta's able to use his ultimate in that fight. They're able to save Vonethils. You look over at the side of Misfits, Zebosai is just about to have his. Nevix just got his this last fight. Crew just got his last fight. And so they're going in 50% of the match, and they just got their ultimates. They just got their setup. But this is what I really like about them. They do a really good job of just accepting the fact that Graviton Surge did enough. They don't need to use more. They're down in the math. Skipjack's still going to have his ult. They're going to have Nevix's ult. They're going to have Zebosai's ult. And that is going to give them a ult advantage because they know that they've seen a Graviton Surge. They know that they've seen a Transcendence. So they can be pretty comfortable that they are going to have a slight advantage because they have the answers, right? If there is a Pulse Bomb, they have the Sound Barrier ideally to get popped up on time to go ahead and negate that damage. They have the Transcendence to deal with any potential upcoming Death Blossom. They have the reactive ultimates to hold the point. But it ends up going pretty bad for them, and I think it's also because of the positioning that they take here. They end up all going on to the pillars here. Whereas honestly, it felt like most of IDDQD was playing, or most of Fnatic was playing on that left side control, playing more up front, more in their faces, constricting them more, not allowing them to get set up more. And the side of Fnatic is able to get full control of Secret, go all the way around into the spawn of Misfits, and then flank them from there. And I mean, I don't. Again, they're the players, they're the professional players, they're at the top of the scene, but I definitely question what was the purpose of that setup, especially when you're not running McCree. They have no long-range hit scan option. They have a Zenyatta, but I don't think holding a long-range position is necessarily worth it when you are only running a Zenyatta as your long-range damage threat. But this is honestly one of the best plays that Misfits ends up having, or soon ends up having here in this game individually. Waits for the right moment, gets a huge Death Blossom that ends up getting them control of the point, and it couldn't have been in any better time. And this is where Misfits needs to start thinking, okay, all right, we can do this, right? We can do this. We can have this. We have 50%, 40%. We have ultimates. Let's take note of it, right? Nevix getting close. Zapri getting very, very close because he's a tracer. He'll basically have it. Skipjack has that ultimate. We need to be using Skipjack's ultimate to zone. We need to get space and buy it. But cool, Matt. He's going to have his Graviton Surge. And again, I think it's so important that he ends up doing as much as he does in this match. He ends up catching two with this Graviton Surge, forcing them back into it. They just blow Kusta's ultimate because they know they just need to win this fight. If they use all of their ultimates and they end up winning this fight, it's completely irrelevant, right? They don't need to have the ultimates after the follow-up because they are at so close to a percentage that the amount of respawn time it'll take for the side of Misfits will basically equal the win. And they end up having one hero getting close, I believe, as it is the D.Va, but they do end up cleaning up the D.Va, and they do end up taking the point off the back of this. But again, I just want to highlight how important it is that you're team shotting, that you're working together, and you're accruing those small advantages. I mean, we talked about small advantages at the very end, but there are definitely small advantages throughout, and that's what you want to do. At the end of the day, if you want to improve consistently, I mean, this is something that a fallacy that I fell into when I played Dota, is that I wanted to be the best as fast as possible. I wanted to look at the top supports, and I wanted to do what they were doing, but not instead of focusing on such a grandiose idea. Look at the small things, right? Well, if I can get my ult up 10% faster than their Zenyatta, if I can get my ult up to 20% faster than their Zenyatta, I'll have a Transcendence before. If I can team shot better with my team, the small concepts, and I really feel like that's what got Fnatic through this, especially in the King of the Hill. The team fighting, the team shotting, cool Matt lighting up, their combinations with the Graviton Surge, and then when you go back to Dorado, I mean, honestly, I definitely have to give it again to the side of Buds, playing an absolutely amazing Reaper throughout the entirety of that, and also IDDQD, but the small things, again, Vonethil survived that Deadeye from Soon because of the Transcendence. They had that very awesome play with the Maywall. There's just a lot of cool things that came out of Fnatic, but again, guys, if you have any thoughts, suggestions, ideas, as I will go ahead and do this. If you guys have any thoughts, any suggestions, ideas as far as this VoD watch or this VoD analysis, you guys think that I missed something, you guys think that I didn't bring out enough of something, or you guys just think that, frankly speaking, there's more discussion to be had on a point that I already brought up, or whatever it is, please do open up the discussion. I don't want these to be an explicit, I'm trying to give all of the information there. I do want it to be a little bit more organic. I want this to be a back and forth between me and the community and just engage in the discussion, put my ideas out there, and just kind of sit down, record, and talk about what I saw in those games. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope that you guys found this VoD review useful, and I hope that the future VoD reviews will become more smooth and give you guys more data and more ideas to help get better at the game of Overwatch. But until then, definitely be checking out the other analysis on in these respects. Definitely check out Flame. Definitely check out r/competitive Overwatch, and definitely check out Matt Rod is his Twitter handle. But definitely check out all that, guys, because of course there is a lot of information out there that you guys can gather, and there's still even more that I need to be studying and getting better at. But again, this is my first VoD review. Looked at the Atlantic Show playoffs between Fnatic and Misfits. Kind of tried to break down what was going on in each of the games, why Fnatic ended up winning the series. And again, guys, if you would like to get more information on this and continue to know more about me, RaptorZ, you can go ahead and do so by following the channel or subscribing to the channel below. In the top left during the cast, there was my, or down below in the comments, you can also find it, will be my Twitch, my Twitter, as well as well, my YouTube, where this is. You guys can subscribe to that, follow to that. Definitely follow me on Twitter for updates. But outside of that, guys, I'll go ahead and put up a previous cast as well as the previous Strat Watch that you guys can go ahead and watch. But that does it for this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for stopping by. And again, you guys are absolutely amazing. And I hope that as time goes on, these VoD analyses become more refined. Not necessarily inorganic, because I do want them to just kind of be me sitting here after watching a game once or twice and just honestly telling you guys what I see as I go through it, as I would have without a camera in front of me regardless. But again, guys, thank you so much, and that'll do it for me.